This here is the chassis of a Panzer II, which was the second vehicle that the Germans developed. Now they were beginning to come up with their own ideas as to how to develop a vehicle with a suspension which had the cart springs, but still a very successful design. Normally, as a tank, it had a turret with a 2-centimeter automatic cannon, and it was the mainstay of panzer divisions in the 38-39 period. After they invaded Russia, they obviously found that this was an inadequate size of weapon to be using in combat with T-34s and so forth. So again, we got the development of taking the basic chassis, which was very good, very reliable, and mounting a German anti-tank gun, the 7.5-centimeter Pak 40, which was the mainstay of the anti-tank troops throughout the war. By mounting it on a former tank chassis, they gave it a mobility and gave it the opportunity of getting into a combat situation rather quickly, whereas previously those guns were towed by half-tracks. Now they could drive into position and could maneuver and change position frequently. So it's a very clever use of an existing chassis design. This chassis is actually based on the Ausführung F of the Panzer II. It's specifically manufactured for the purpose of mounting the anti-tank gun on it, so they continue the production, and they just put this simple body with a minimum amount of armour to protect the guys from small arms fire and from shrapnel. The result was rather interesting. Here at the back you have the ammunition canisters, which could be folded up out of the way to get in at the motor for maintenance purposes. But a good number of these were built before the decision was made that this Pak 40 would only be mounted on the Czech 38T built chassis that we see on the Swedish vehicles also. And this chassis was then redesigned, putting the engine to the front beside the driver, and mounting a 10.5 centimeter Feldhaubitze, so it became a self-propelled artillery piece. And this particular one is quite heavily modified from the basic Panzer II, because you have these additional springs that are added in. There are 3 of them, which improve the suspension with the heavy weight of the anti-tank gun on top. But this was a very important part of the German Panzerjäger troops, and here in Sweden you can actually see one of these. I think it's the only one in Europe. Yeah, while this one is a brand new vehicle that was manufactured specifically for mounting the anti-tank gun, what also has to be remembered is that damaged and worn out Panzer IIs were coming back from the front. And the process then was to rebuild them, remove the superstructure and remove the turret. And again, the turrets weren't thrown away, they were refurbished and sent to the Festungstruppen to be mounted on concrete bunkers, again along the West Wall and in Italy and so forth. And the chassis were refurbished and sent back into the field, mounting these anti-tank guns in them. So looking at the front of the vehicle, we can see some features that were specific to the Ausführung F. You have a front plate that's flat on the vehicle, whereas all Panzer IIs before that actually had a rounded plate. Now that's disguised in photographs because after the experience of combat in Poland, they up-armoured the vehicles and put an extra plate, which created the impression in a photograph that it has a front plate, but that's not the case. And then the earlier Panzer IIs also had a superstructure that went in at an angle here. When the Ausführung F came along, they had a front plate all the way across, and as a tank they had a visor here that's dispensed with, because this was, as I said, a chassis that was built specifically by FAMO or Ursus in Poland, specifically for a self-propelled gun situation. Looking at experience reports with these, the Panzerjäger guys that wrote the experience reports commented that one of the problems they had was the travel lock, which was essential to use on the gun, because when they were traveling it could be shaken out of alignment, but to get themselves into combat quickly they had to remove this travel lock, and if it was in a live combat situation it was a risky performance by one of the crewmen getting out to undo that separately, and they asked for subsequently a development where the travel lock could be unlocked automatically. In fact, they came up with other solutions for that. But we also see on this vehicle some interesting aspects. Here we see a patch where it's being repaired, and there's an area on the side of the vehicle where there's evidence of a repair. So this has been in some hard combat. So again, it's fascinating to see one of these vehicles in Europe, and well worth a trip to study it in detail.